Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Scheinman, Vice President of Audubon Society of Central Arkansas. Welcome to our monthly meeting. And this month's featured presenter is Raven Lawson, who is the Watershed Protection Manager at Central Arkansas Water, the state's largest drinking water utility, serving 1 in every 6 Arkansans. For more than 15 years, she's worked in many aspects of ecology and natural resources management, ranging from studying organisms in their systems to working in public education and water quality advocacy. In her current position, she and her team are responsible for the protection and management of nearly 25,000 acres of watershed land and water resources owned by the utility. And they are charged with ensuring that nearly 500,000 Arkansans have clean, safe drinking water. Thank you. And that the plants, animals, and people of the Lake Maumelle and Lake Winona watersheds have a thriving place to call home. With that, Raven Lawson, please take it away.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you to everyone on the screen this evening for having me. I love to get to talk about what I do and the great things that my team and I are tasked with doing every single day. So it's always a pleasure to get to present to people who will appreciate our work and help us spread the good word of the great work that we do. I see a few familiar faces and friends on here this evening. So hi, some of you have already kind of seen today via another virtual presentation or two. So again, thanks for hearing me out and thanks for helping me be advocates for Central Arkansas Water and the watershed protection that we do. So with that, I will start my screen share. There we go. Dan, give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Always double check. Good deal. All right. So tonight I'm going to round us out just generally talking about our entire program and what we do. And in doing so, I'll give you a little bit of history and background of why we do it, how we do both forest management, restoration, consider recreation and different things that we do. And hopefully I'll give you some little nuggets of things to take away and maybe do or encourage others to do on their landscapes. And I'll give you some places to come visit and to go birding and check out some pretty great habitats that we've created. So without further ado, again, Central Arkansas Water is the largest drinking water supplier in the state of Arkansas. So if you're in the greater Little Rock area, which this is the Central Arkansas chapter, I'm assuming most of you are, you likely get your drinking water from one of these two water sources, Lake Winona or Lake Maumelle. And the area in green is the actual watershed that protects those drinking water sources and gives us the great and excellent water quality that we have. A lot of people, when you say you're protecting land or managing land to protect water, they think about those landscapes immediately adjacent to the water resources. But as you can see here, Lake Maumelle, for instance, in the center of the screen, the lake is only 1/10 of the area of land that protects that lake. So we've got 89 100-acre lake and 88,000 acres of land resources that are responsible for all of the water that end up in that lake. So if you're unfamiliar with what a watershed is, it's that whole area of land that when it rains, drains into one central location. And so all of the little creeks that feed the rivers and the rivers feed the lakes, all those tributaries and all that land that filters into those have the potential to impact every glass of water that comes out of the tap. And so that is why we recognize watershed protection as an essential piece of our public health strategy. if you will, at Central Arkansas Water. So again, we have 2 reservoirs in which we pull water from. They're highlighted on the screen. Lake Maumelle is where I'm going to base the majority of my talk, though, because Lake Winona is kind of nestled into the Ouachita National Forest. We do get 1/3 of our drinking water supply daily from that reservoir, though, so I don't want to forget about it, but you'll quickly see why the majority of the focus will be in and around the Lake Maumelle area. So if you've never been to these places, I'll give you a quick sky view of them. This is Lake Winona out in the Ouachita National Forest. You can see it's heavily forested. The entire area is, I think, 99 and some change % forested because of the Forest Service landscape. Does come with its own challenges, though, and its own unique properties when it comes to water quality, but otherwise fairly protected just in its location itself. Lake Maumelle is the lake that you see when you hike up Pinnacle Mountain. So when you're at the top of Pinnacle Mountain and you're looking down at that beautiful blue water, you can wave down at us. We're doing work down there somewhere, but that is Lake Maumelle. It is quickly becoming more impacted by development, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, but still yet very heavily forested, majority forested or intact landscapes. Both of these reservoirs are designated by the USGS and the EPA as reference reservoirs for drinking water quality. And so there's only maybe a dozen of those across the United States, and we have 2 of them. And so when they are looking at new standards for water quality for drinking water, they come and mine our data. They look at our reservoirs and see what's going on to help them make informed decisions. So that is pretty important. And the USGS has been quoted as saying that Lake Maumelle specifically is more pristine than other reservoirs. And when you're thinking about a pristine water source or a pristine landscape, sorry, I have a 2.5-year-old. He's on the other side of the door. You think about Colorado or somewhere where there are snow melt mountain fed streams, right? Like when I just say the words pristine reservoirs, those are the pictures that come into your mind. But we have this right in our own backyard, and it's such a special resource, and not only for drinking water, but it holds a lot of other qualities that are worth protecting as well. So why do we protect? Why do we put emphasis on protecting Lake Maumelle? Other than it's the drinking water source for 500,000 Arkansans, it's also our more threatened resource. And when you think about the growing population that lake is responsible for serving and the potential threats towards it, you can quickly understand why we put so much emphasis into it. So if you look at the screen here, this is a satellite image from December of 1984. Pretty good timing for this, if I do say so myself. But one of my employees actually put this together for me. So December 1984, this is what the landscape looked like. You can see Little Rock in the lower right-hand corner. That is the city as it was then. If you look to the northwest corner of the screen, you see the lake. I know it's a little muted, so it's hard to pick out, but that's where the Lake Maumelle is. And so you can see that there's very little development, virtually no roads heading out west of Little Rock, and lots of forested landscapes. But as you go through time, you see things quickly change. And so this is, I think, from 6 months ago. This is the current development. So I'll go back and forth a few times. 1984 to present day, you see the change in the landscape, and you see the development. Not only development, but the city limits have creeped further and further westward toward the lake. So again, 84, present day, if you missed it, here's some highlights. So these are the newer developed areas in that 35-year time frame. So over time, we've recognized this westward expansion of central Arkansas and of Little Rock, and the need to put people places, right? So we really wanted to understand what the potential impact of that westward expansion would mean for our water resource. And so in 2006 and 7, we commissioned a study to look at the Lake Maumelle Reservoir. We have data going back to the 80s for a consistent database going back to the 80s for water quality. They also looked at projected development at the time in 2007. This was just prior to the last economic collapse, housing market collapse. There were lots of platted subdivisions out around the lake. And through that process, they found what we already knew, that our water quality was excellent. But if those build outs were to keep up with the pace of that westward expansion and that development were to happen at the pace and at the density that we were seeing, that our future water quality was going to degrade. And it was pretty much no question that it would or wouldn't happen. It would. And at some point you hit a tipping point where there's kind of a point of no return when you have inputs into a system with nutrients and heated runoff. You see algae blooms and you see all these different things that happen. And so that's a real threat to a reservoir that was built solely for the purpose of drinking water, which is unique. There are no other major reservoirs in the state of Arkansas that had the sole purpose of being built for drinking water, but our two are. And so we have a lot of leverage there and a lot of things to work with. So we adopted the management plan, and some people on the in the meeting tonight were actually part of that process. I think this is the most important sentence out of the whole big document. And it basically says that, we can't do one single thing. We can't just stop development, or we can't just purchase lands or manage for different things and ensure that that water quality is going to be there over time. We're going to have to put a whole suite of resources and management methods together in order to accomplish, extending the life of this resource. And so that's really what my group does, and that is what the whole rest of this presentation is going to be about. So why do we do it? Why do we protect our resource? Well, I've already given you several reasons, but one of the reasons that utilities are starting to do this is because it's part of a regulated process. The EPA has this multi-barrier approach to ensure public health through drinking water, and we're at the prevention end of this. So if we can protect the water at its source or before it even gets to the source, that's our first line of defense. That's our first set of treatment parameters that we can put towards our drinking water. So any contaminants and any pollutants that can get in there, we can start from the moment it drops out of the sky and runs across the landscape, and we can use prevention to help ensure public health and safety. But along the way, we have lots of other processes and checks and balances that help do that as well. So the things that we can't catch on the front end, we can catch in treatment, or we can monitor the distribution system. That's all the pipes that take it from the treatment plant to your homes and your schools and hospitals. And so we have all of these regulations that ensure that our drinking water is top notch and that people can feel safe drinking it and bathing in it and using it in their daily lives. So what are the threats? I mentioned development is a threat, but development itself is not the threat. It's the intake of increased sediment and increased contamination and all the heat island effect and things that come with that development that impact the water. But one thing that a lot of people don't think about is how the forest itself can be a threat. I would say our forest is our biggest friend, and I'll continue to talk about that as we go. But on the surface, our forests also do contain potential threats to our water quality. And you can see in this photo here, we've got lots of leaf litter and we've got lots of dead woody debris. And you can see it's springtime here. It's the growing season. There's some green on the trees and nothing's in the understory. All of this dead material, as it decomposes and as it degrades, it creates complex carbons. So every living thing is or was carbon, right? And so as this decomposition happens, these complex carbons are created. And when it rains, that pushes those carbons into our reservoir. In and of itself, not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're talking about typical rivers and lakes and streams. There's a lot of good things that come with that. But when you're talking about drinking water specifically, that decomposing material and those complex carbons actually create a treatment issue. And so when we take, and that's what this little science triangle over here is, when we take our disinfectants, so that's our bleaches and our chlorines and whatever the water utility uses to treat the water to make it safe for public consumption, that disinfectant can bind with that complex carbon and create what we call a disinfection byproduct. That's what that DBP stands for. So if it's under the right conditions, they can bind together, and it's a really nasty molecule. Some states have regulated it as a carcinogen. And so the last thing we want people to do is get cancer from their drinking water. So don't worry, we have that multi-barrier approach that I just spoke about, that we can do multiple different things along the process to take care of that. But if we have the opportunity to stop some of that on the front end, on the ground, then why wouldn't we do it? And so that's where our forest management comes into play. And I'll touch on that more in a couple of slides. In Arkansas, we've really adopted this healthy forest equals healthy water mantra, if you will. We have formed a whole collaborative. It started 8 years ago. And it's where we brought the drinking water utilities and the forest industries and forestry related professionals together in one room. And we have met as frequent as monthly. We meet as minimally as quarterly. And every 2 years, we have a public forum in a conference style setup. It's usually 2 days, where we talk about the similarities, the differences, and how we can best communicate both with each other and with the public to create this one story about how we need to protect our forest and what that does for our drinking water. So it's healthy water, or healthy forest equal healthy water. We put them on our bumper stickers, on our watershed trucks, and all of our colleagues at the Division of Forestry also have them. But what that means for us is not just healthy water, but if you look at this map, don't pay attention to the colored parcels, but you see these blue squiggly lines. Those are our major tributaries across the watershed that feed into each other and fill up that lake. And so if we've got healthy forest creating healthy water and we've got healthy tributaries, then we have healthy source water. And so that's why our management focus has to reach way beyond just the areas of land that surround the lake. What does that mean at the end of the day? Well, if we can better treat the forest and create a healthy forest, we're getting to that healthy drinking water But along the way in that process, we're saving money on treatment cost, on chemical cost, on electricity, and all these things that you don't think about that it takes to get water from a lake to your glass. And that means we can pass the savings on to our customers. And so just in today's board meeting, we highlighted once again that we have one of the lowest water bills in the country on average. And so we want to keep it that way. And the first piece of that is taking care of the landscape. So my program, the Watershed Protection Program, it consists of me and 4 guys under me. We have Brian Rupar, who some of you probably know from his time at the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. He is our land conservation coordinator, so he heads up a lot of our current land negotiations, purchasing, and our forestry management. And then we have Ben Tessing, who just forgot that I was giving this presentation and tried to call me. He is our natural resource specialist. He is tasked, he's got a big job. He's tasked with monitoring the watershed. And I'll tell you all about the little ins and outs of things he monitors later on in the presentation. And then I have 2 technicians, Mark and Michael. They've been with the utility a really long time. They do a lot of our boots on the ground maintenance, upkeep, patrolling, and they take care of a lot of our public spaces that hopefully you will all visit at some point. So that's my crew, and we are tasked with enhancing the natural environment of these 2 watersheds and keep them as clean as possible. So how do we do it? If I told you everything that we did on a daily basis, it would, one, we would be here the rest of the evening. But my best attempt at categorizing them is what you see here. We've kind of got 7 major categories of things that we do day in and day out that all helps that mission to protect and enhance these watersheds. The first being that we buy land and put it into conservation. Then we take care of those lands through forest management, through restoration. Then we monitor what we're doing to make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is. Then we go out and we talk to people about what we're doing. We do education and outreach, just like I'm doing tonight, because the more people I can tell, the more times I can multiply our story. And the more good it does for not just the landscape of Central Arkansas, but I believe in Arkansas and maybe even the whole US. Then I'm going to touch on the risk that we have out in the watershed, and just know that we kind of house the emergency response for those risks. And I'll wrap it up talking about how we intertwine with wildlife and compatible recreation. So those are what goes into managing the lands that we have. And again, it's nearly 25,000 acres of land and water resources between the 2 watersheds. So it's quite a hefty task. And if I divided it among my staff, we would only have 5,000 acres each to keep an eye on. And that's just the lands we own. So, oh, Barry, you'll be disappointed. I didn't update my slide. So as of today, at board meeting from this afternoon, we now have over 4,500 acres of property that we have purchased. We approved 3 new purchases just today, and we placed another 589 acres under conservation easement. That's just an old number I forgot to update. So our total land ownership to date is over 11,700 acres. And as of today, we passed a milestone of more than 5,000 acres under protection since the inception of our watershed management plan in 2007. So it's been a big day. And this graphic is just an old snapshot of some of those lands that we've purchased. You can see that they're strategic. We started out with the purchase, or most of them were purchased with the purchase of the valley that we flooded to make the reservoir. Those are in green. Some of those were added over time, but then those properties in red that you see are purchases that we purchased over the last few years. Some of those extend our borders around our lake to give us bigger buffers, and others of those are along major tributaries to the lake. So we're starting with the protection of the immediate lands around the water and working our way out. You may have read about or heard about one of our recent awards. We've actually won 3 or 4 in the last 6 months. I'm really proud of my group for all their hard work and efforts. But this one was a big one for us. We received the world's first ever certified green bond for the protection of forest lands as a part of water infrastructure. So this was a $6.5 million certified green bond, specifically to purchase lands, forested lands. There's only been one other certified green bond in the entire world that was used to purchase forest, and it was in Thailand, but it was not recognizing those landscapes as infrastructure. So that was a big win, a big first. It's getting lots of attention. I'll actually be presenting this in Stockholm's World Water Week in a few weeks. So we're a big highlight as part of one of the panels there. But yes, first in the world to recognize our working lands as infrastructure when it comes to a water utility. So we're quite proud of that, and we thank our partners at WRI and Encourage Capital for helping us through that process. So what do we do with all these lands that we buy? We manage them. We're trying to manage them. We are very far behind. Our ability to purchase lands has outpaced our ability to manage them, but we're quickly catching up. And you'll see a lot more from us over the next few years in this realm. But when we purchase these lands, our best effort is to create these healthy forest landscapes. And our major goal is what it does for water quality. So we do this through a burn, thin, burn rotation. I'll talk through that in a second. But our goals for forest management are what you see in blue on this slide. We want to reduce that total organic carbon and reduce the inputs and potential for disinfection byproducts first and foremost. Then we want to enhance the health and the quality of these forests to provide water quality filtration. I'll tell you how that happens in a second. But then, of course, just by doing those things, even though our priorities are what affects the water quality, we're getting a lot of secondary benefits that our partners really care about too. We're producing healthier, more resilient forests. We're producing bigger, healthier trees, better marketable timber when we do thin our forest. We're reducing the risks of wildfire. And of course, we're improving wildlife habitat and plant and animal diversity and recreational opportunities, creating lots of great places to go birding. So when I say we burn and thin, first, I'll show you what a burn looks like. Actually, let's talk about the roots first. So when we burn, we're doing a prescribed fire, and I'm sure most of you know what that is. So we do a very low intensity fire to burn off that dead debris that I was talking about earlier, those layers of duff. We've all seen it. We've all hiked around Arkansas in the fall. We've got layers and layers of leaves that build up over time. That chokes out the soil and really inhibits anything else from growing up through it. So we're burning that off to open that soil up. We're returning those dead materials into the soil directly as nutrients. We're opening the soil up to intake water better. And then we go back to 5th grade science, and what are we missing to grow plants? We've given them nutrients and we've given them water, but we're missing that sunlight component. So most of our forests in Arkansas are way overstocked and overcrowded with trees. And so if you look in the history books, what we've read about from early settlers to Arkansas is that they were driving wagon trains through the forest. Think about how many of our forests today you can drive a horse and wagon through. Very few. That means that our landscape was very different originally, both in the way it was managed and how it grew naturally. And we have truncated these resources and suppressed management through fire and removal of unwanted species over time, introduced invasives and exotics. And so all of these efforts to both light the forest on fire and cut down trees are actually to make it healthier and to return it to its former glory and to make those landscapes more like they should be. So when we go in, we don't thin to wagon trains, but we are looking at very specific trees that we can pull out of the landscape that will help open up the canopy and allow sunlight to infiltrate to the forest floor, so that once we get those soils warmed up with sun and with some nutrients, and we've let them breathe and given them some water, less competition, then all of these native plants can flourish in the understory. We're looking at our native grasses and flowers. And for us, yes, it's a beautiful landscape, but what we're interested in is what's beneath the soil. That's what we're showing here. So all of these native plants have very expansive root systems, some as deep as 15 feet. On average, I think the average Arkansas native plant has a root system of over 5 foot deep. All of those roots are able to uptake pollutants or things we would consider pollutants to our water. So all of those nutrients and things that run across the landscape, that's what helps these plants grow. And the more roots they have, the more opportunity they have to grab a hold of it. They also hold all our dirt in place. So they hold that sediment in place. Sediment is the biggest pollutant in the state of Arkansas to our waterways. So when you have lots of roots, it's holding all that in. And so when it flash floods, we're not just pushing sediment down into the reservoirs. So this is what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that trifecta of growing native understories and getting lots of roots in the ground, because that's just more filters for us. So just a quick, I'm going to show you 2 different photos. This one's from the exact same spot, but it's in its infancy in forest management. It is thinner than a lot of our forests, but we haven't thinned this one yet. So you can see where the trees are. You can see they've got lots of room to grow. You see the duff and layers of dead debris on the ground. Then we burn it off. And yes, when we burn it off, it looks pretty devastating, but it only looks that way for a few weeks because we've given all of those plants that are in the historic seed bank the prime opportunity to get everything they need to grow. And so within just a few weeks, we start greening up and you see what a difference is the understory, what the makeup of the understory is and how big of a difference that is. And what we've seen in a lot of our recent managed areas, so ones that we have burned, thinned, and burned again, we can walk through those today. I walked through one just 3 or 4 weeks ago, filming some educational videos, and could not find poison ivy. And the only greenbriers I saw were dead. And we didn't go through there and remove those things. It was through this process of letting those natives take back over. And so we have this beautiful sea of river oats and compass flowers and marshallia that Ben likes to talk about. And so we've got all of these things that are on the forest floor that are coming up over time. So again, we're taking these dark, dense, overcrowded stands. You can see this is in the prime growing season. And there's nothing growing on the forest floor. We come in and we burn it. then we take out a few trees, and we get these gorgeous landscapes. They may be, tick heaven, I don't know, but we do have a beautiful variety of flowers that bloom in different seasons. And all I see when I look out across there is plants that are catching water and doing us a lot of good. So what else is involved in forest management? I mean, that was the biggest thing on our agenda, was how do we create these habitats, right? So the habitats that we create through, I'll go back a slide, through this forest management. You look at that third photo down, that's taken from a parking lot, but that is one of our demonstration units. What you see there is refuge for ground nesting birds, and you see forage for deer and other large game species. And it creates that habitat that you just simply don't get in that first photo. There's no food, there's no refuge, there's no protection. So we're getting a lot of benefits other than just water quality. Another thing that's overlooked a lot is our unpaved roads and our forest roads. We do have to make some roads to get in there to remove some of these trees. They also make great paths to walk on for wildlife viewing and other things. But if you look at that first photo, we've all seen this. We're from Central Arkansas. We've seen these roads degrade. You get a flash flood, turns those roads into rivers, and it eats them up. And you can see the depressions in that road versus the one on the bottom. All of that sediment went somewhere. It went downhill. And if water's carrying it, it's carrying it to the nearest water body. And you'd be surprised to know that Lake Maumelle is only 25 feet deep on average. That's a very, very shallow reservoir. A lot of drinking water reservoirs pull water from more than 150 feet, Greer's Ferry, for instance. So we've only got a little bit of lake to work with. And if we keep slumping sediment into it, we're slowly filling it up over time, and we're diminishing that resource for 500,000 people. I don't want to be the one responsible for making 500,000 people lose their drinking water source. So we're going to try to keep the sediment out if we can. Of course, with sediment also comes anything that can bind to it, historic metals and herbicides and pesticides and things like that. So we're starting an effort to better inventory and keep an eye on our roads. We do have one demonstration area that we've done some maintenance on recently, but we're looking to expand this piece of our program in the next few years. What else have we done? Well, we've taken some landscapes and reforested them. This property in particular was a former sod farm that we purchased back in 2014 as a Forest Legacy grant purchase. It was 915 acres at the time. We have since added a lot of acreage to around the borders of that. This one property contiguous is now over about 1,500 acres. But the sod farm itself was on over 700 acres. And we've been trying to figure out what areas are best suited for replanting, and then what I'm going to show you next. So to date, we have replanted over 200 acres of forest with 60,000 trees. We've done that since 2016, the majority of which were volunteer planted, all by hand. So it's been a big undertaking. And if I were giving this presentation a year from today, I think I'd be able to project accounted for areas that we would be planting of more than 100,000 trees. So we've got a lot coming up on the horizon. But what we're finding, of course, is what I said, is that not all of our landscapes are suited to be in forest. We have some good prime prairie habitat based on the species that have repopulated from opening up that seed bank in the soil. And so we know that we can't forest everything. And some of those areas that we've thinned out in the forest, what we're seeing is savanna and prairie species of plants coming up in the understory. And so it's making us rethink some of our original management plans and styles. So one big undertaking that we've had our hands in with partners at Audubon, you'll maybe see some familiar faces in the group, some local garden clubs and the Game and Fish Commission. We have a 12-acre property, which doesn't sound very big, but it's quite an imprint based on what we've done with it, where we are bringing in locally sourced, native, hand-collected seeds to turn this former sod field into a place that other groups and organizations can come to as a local seed source in the future. We didn't want to grow it out like Dan's farming program, but we wanted to have some more natural landscapes out there to which maybe we could collect seed from to put into that program in the future, or to plant other areas that our partners and friends across this central Arkansas area would be doing habitat enhancement on the future. So these 12 acres have been treated for the sod. We've burned them, and we've put this group together to go and hand collect seeds for, I was very surprised. I was thinking about when we first started collecting seeds, but it's been almost 3 years that we hand collect seeds seasonally from very local areas so that we have local genotypes in this field. And I was pregnant when we did some of these seed collecting. I was looking through the photos earlier, but again, we hand collected all of the seeds. You can see that in the bottom photo highlighted in green. We hand sorted the seeds. You can see that at the Audubon Center in the lower right-hand corner. Go up to the upper left-hand corner. We dried the seeds. Actually, we dried them before we sorted and separated them. So we did this in a loft at one of our Maumelle River field station. And then we planted, and we were blessed with the best opportunity for planting a lot of these seeds. And some of you probably know a lot of native plants need a freeze in order to best, set themselves up for best success. And the date we had on the calendar for a month to do this just happened to be a couple of days before that 2 foot of snow that we got back in February. And so we think that that's going to really catapult and enhance this field. We're already seeing some great things come up with the very first planting, but we've got more picking and collecting and sorting on the horizon. We actually have another date already on the calendar. I believe it's week after next to go out and collect some more seeds to go into this field. So we'll do that for the next 2 or 3 years and continue to populate that field, and we'll see what happens. But it's a good story that we hope has a lot of success. So if you're looking to volunteer, that's one of our opportunities. We can always use extra hands out there pulling and deadheading native plants. Of course, this is called the Covey Project by the garden clubs that we worked with, but we recognize it as so much more. Planting not only for quails, but pollinators and for water quality. Other things that we do in restoration that are kind of outside of the forested and landscape habitat are our in-stream restorations. We remove low water crossings and stabilize banks. Again, our goals are what's in blue. When we do this, we're looking to reduce sediment, reduce nutrients, and to put water back on the landscape. but there's a lot of co-benefits involved, and that's a lot of times where our funding comes from to do these projects. So I'll talk just real quickly about low water crossings. Low water crossings are, or low head dams. They are in-stream barriers that not only block fish passage, they create safety hazards, and they create increased sedimentation as they break apart. So you can see this one that we did most recently has a lot of potential for degradation. So it started falling apart, and those big pieces of concrete, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm going to kind of talk you through and demonstrate. So when those big pieces of concrete bust apart and move, they create these giant boulders in the stream that weren't there. And when the water flows past them, it has to change course, and it changes velocity, and it changes the amount of water that goes in different areas. And that often causes excessive stream bank instability, and those cutaway banks that you see, those big, deep, barren banks. And just like I talked about when we turn gravel and unpaved roads into streams, same concept. When these streams hit those banks and break off that sediment, it's taking all that sediment straight down river and straight into the reservoir, bringing with it all of the things that combined with it, but just simply filling it up. So here's just a quick look at, like I said, the most recent removal, just showing you some construction pictures. Again, a lot of management is messy, and it doesn't look appealing or safe or natural when you start it, but the goal, the end goal, and the long-term effects are enormous. And so we put up with a little bit of the ugly to get to where we want to go. Here it is, fully removed. The fish passage and the stream passage has been restored here. We replaced it with this bridge that hopefully one day we'll all be able to meet in person. And when you want to have a meeting on a Thursday night in the future, I can have you out at our Maumelle River Field Station, and maybe we can go look at some of these areas beforehand and have a little reception or something in the building afterwards. But it's a great location. We've done a lot of restoration on this landscape, and we're pretty proud of what we've got on the other side of that bridge. So if COVID would get out of the way, and if we could repair the bridge that has some issues, we'll have everybody out. Here's another stream bank stability project that was a low water crossing that we didn't replace with a bridge. We needed the bridge for access to this cool area to show everybody. But in this instance, we didn't. And so this is just a before and after. You can see what that looks like. The gentleman standing in that photo on the left is Matt Van Epps. If you know him, he's from Northwest Arkansas. He is probably 6'5", and he's in the middle of that cut bank. It was well over 12 feet of bank cutting and lots of sediment that went downstream over time, and we've leveled that out and fixed it. So I told you I'd tell you what Ben does. Ben is charged with monitoring the watersheds, and that is not just on the properties that we own. That is the forest and the rivers and the creeks throughout the watersheds. And he looks at a lot of different things to determine water quality health and forest health, like looking at aquatic wildlife. So if you see that insect in my hand there, it's bigger than a quarter, and that is a dragonfly nymph. So I show that because I want you to realize that a lot of the insects that we see flying around, and which produce great food for a lot of our birds, start out their life, and the biggest portion of their life, as aquatic organisms. So that's a dragonfly. What's important about this is that we can look at the populations of these insects and these different tributaries over time, and we can learn about who lives where, learn about the community and the population, and develop a relationship of knowing who will be where when. And we can study that year after year. Hopefully it's predictable, but if something goes awry, if we show up to an area where we know we've got a 45 different species of insects that we typically find there in large abundance. And then one day we show up and no one's home. None of the insects are there. Red flag, that's our canaries in a coal mine. They are our quickest water quality indicators that we have. And so if they are experiencing loss or disappearing, that is a clue for us to get our heads up out of the water and look around the landscape and find out what's going on. Because even if that happens 40 miles away in the Ouachita National Forest, if it's in that watershed, it has the potential to impact our public health. And so we want to see what's happening and catch it long before it gets into the reservoir and affects our population. So that's just some of the things he looks at. Fish, plants, birds, insects, lots and lots of things to monitor, all for the sake of water quality. Then, like I said, we do education and outreach. And sometimes that is going on a hunting and fishing radio show twice a year and talking about what we're doing on the landscape to enhance habitats or just remind people where their drinking water comes from. Dan will recognize that photo in the bottom right-hand corner. That was on a birding walk that he gave on the former grass farm. We partner with local universities, not only sponsoring classes and field trips, but also providing internships. And we work with local hunters and fishermen to understand why we do things differently on our landscapes, why we don't allow rifle hunting and it's archery only, or why they can't sink Christmas trees to produce fish habitat in the lakes, and we have to build artificial habitats. So all of these things are some different ways we build in education, not just giving these PowerPoint presentations. We also host cleanups that we hope to see all of you at. We have cleanups typically in the fall, sometimes in the spring. And we did hold one last year in COVID, and we'll probably hold another one this year, but we're holding off a little bit on announcing a date, but it'll be probably mid-October. And then lastly, risk mitigation and emergency response. Those of you from Central Arkansas remember the ExxonMobil Pegasus pipeline rupture in Mayflower in 2013. That same pipeline runs through the Lake Maumelle Watershed for 13 miles and crosses open water in 13 different places. We're only 8 miles from where that rupture happened. So if that rupture had happened in the Lake Maumelle Watershed, we would be probably having a much different conversation right now, or none at all, because we wouldn't be using it as a water source anymore. So that's probably our largest threat to our water source. Even though I talked about all the others, this is the one that keeps me up at night. So we do have different emergency response plans for that, as well as roadside truck spills and things like that. So that our protection doesn't end at the landscape, it also goes into human impacts as well. For those of you who are interested in hunting and fishing, we are part of a 99-year lease with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, the Maumelle River WMA. Like I said, it's archery only hunting for deer and other large game during season. And then we do have some small game shotgun areas, for youth hunting and stuff like that. Mostly it's archery only because of the narrow corridors that we have between the highway and the lake and the Ouachita Trail and people's homes. So if you're interested in that, it is a 300 permit draw each year. So right now, we may change that in the future, but the regulations do change slightly from year to year. So go to Game and Fish's website and check that out. We also have the Ouachita National Recreation Trail. 40 miles of it runs through the entire watershed. In the last 24 miles, either runs through or borders Central Arkansas water property. And it starts in Oklahoma and it ends at Pinnacle Mountain State Park. So we're pretty proud to be on the tail end of the Ouachita National Trail because it sees a lot of people. It's the source of enjoyment for thru hikers starting in Oklahoma and ending in our great state. But also because it's just outside of Little Rock, it gets a lot of traffic on this end as well. So that's one of the resources that we both help manage and take care of, and that we offer as a recreation opportunity. And a new one that I'm really excited about, and I think Dan is too, is we recently expanded the loop at Bufflehead Bay. So if you've never been to Lake Maumelle, you can actually look up Bufflehead Bay on Google, but it's just past the West Rock Landing Marina. It's the very next right. This is our forest demonstration area. So we really upkeep the forest management in this area, and we've seen some incredible native wildflowers and grasses come up through this area. So we wanted to show it off. And it did have a trail that ended at a birding platform, but we've since expanded that to make an entire loop back to the parking lot. So if you are out and enjoying it this time of year, I suggest you park at the parking lot and turn right and go down the asphalt. And on the way back to your car, you're going to see the interior for the most part, and see the changes in those wildflowers from week to week and the different things that are blooming. If you're doing it after leaf off in the winter, I suggest hiking it the other direction. So go out of the parking lot and start on the dirt, because that way you're going to get the long open expanses of the lake. And it's probably the best hiking view of the lake, better than the Ouachita National Trail for sure. So go check that out. It's very family friendly. I've taken my 2.5-year-old out there a couple of different times. I only have to carry him through a piece of it. But we're proud of it. It's new. We haven't had the official ribbon cutting yet, but it is open to the public. If you go out there today, you'll see a lot of posts where signs used to be. We're getting those remade, and we're hoping to make that a big deal pretty soon. But here's just some of the things you'll see along the way in different seasons. So you can see how that's a very different type of forest landscape than you would typically see in some unmanaged areas. With that, I'll wrap up. I love to give a shout out to all of our partners at the end, because like I said at the beginning, there's just 5 of us. They're really tasked with this protection effort and a lot of acreage. And so we lean heavily on our partnerships and those entities who can help provide us with technical expertise, with funding, with hands and feet a lot of times, and just help us do the great work that we do out there. So I do thank them very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Raven. That was wonderful. We do have time for questions. And again, you can either type your question in the chat and I will relay it to Raven, or you can take yourself off mute and ask it. And I will say that Lake Maumelle water quality has been an issue that ASCA has followed for a long time. I remember my very first ASCA meeting when I moved to Arkansas. Barry was talking about Lake Maumelle, and that was on the agenda for years and years. And maybe it's a testament that you guys have done a great job that he doesn't have to bring up the issue at our meetings so much these days. So I really appreciate everything you're doing there.
And if any of you travel, you understand what a gem we have with our good tasting water. We actually recently won. We were in the top 5 for best tasting water in the country. So that was a recent
I'll drink
thing.
to that.
Likewise.
I do have a question for you. All
right.
You mentioned sediment getting in there, and that the lake is 25 feet deep on average, which is shallower than I thought. I assumed since there's so many loons on that lake, it must be much deeper. But then again, they breed on shallow lakes up north, so I guess it's not that big a deal. But might there be any need in the future to dredge the lake, or has the lake ever been dredged in places?
Sure. Yeah. I believe the lake has been dredged in areas in the past. I'm actually not 100% sure, but I do believe it has been. at the confluence with the river specifically and near our intake. And we do actually keep an eye on that. We do bathymetric surveys, which is just basically reading the topography of the bottom of the lake to see where areas are filling in over time. And so we keep an eye on it. We have talked about dredging west of the Highway 10 river, or west of the Highway 10 bridge in the river mouth. And we may do that probably in the next 5 years. It does catch a lot more sediment, but that's good because that's the furthest away from our intake. But it's not currently in the plan or the budget, but we do keep an eye on it and we do talk about it quite a bit. I see a couple of questions from the chat. Discuss the relationship with farming and whether there are aquifers in the watershed. There aren't aquifers that we use for drinking water quality. We do have wellhead areas though, north of the lake, and so lots of the residents are on wells. So aquifer recharge and water quantity issues aren't a real big issue for us. And relationship with farming, there aren't that many farms in the Lake Maumelle Watershed. We do have a few, but most of them are small hobby farms of different varieties. We have some fruit and berry farms that the ones that we have out there are pretty conscientious and good stewards of the watershed. We only have one farm that has a good number of cows and horses, and they are one of our conservation easements, and they've been recognized by both the Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Forest Service for their stewardship. It's the Vogel Poles, if any of you know them. They've won a lot of awards. They have reimagined what a farm looks like for livestock, and they've decommissioned a lot of working areas of their farm and put them into quail habitat, and they're starting to do forest management, and so they're really good partners. A lot of the other farms have, like I said, they're hobby style, so they have 4 or 5 horses or 4 or 5 cows, some goats, but we don't have a lot of farming in the Lake Maumelle Watershed, fortunately. Moving on, are burns the only way you are controlling invasive species? No, we do use herbicide in certain areas, and we are very judicious with our herbicide use. We typically target species like privet and wisteria, and it is very direct on the plants themselves. We don't broadcast spray herbicides unless we are pre-treating a former sod area for upcoming planting, but even then we use aquatic safe herbicides. So we do use some herbicides. We do hand control, and one department in the utility has gotten a mulcher head that we've been able to let them come out and train people on how to use, and we've been starting to get a lot of our overgrowth of privet and greenbrier areas taken care of with that. So burning is not the only way we control invasives. So hopefully that answered that question. Lynn asked, how do control burns in spring and summer affect box turtles? Well, Lynn, I am not a box turtle expert, but a lot of our turtles, I mean, these are quick moving, low intensity fires, and I have seen them move over and around turtles. Typically they get the hint pretty quick and can move into safe areas, but a lot of wildlife can burrow a little bit or get up next to a tree, and the fire moves fairly quickly around them and they go unharmed. I mean, I'm sure we definitely lose some turtles along the way, but if you've ever stood on a fire line, you've probably gotten run over by snakes, exiting rabbits and things like that. So they just move out for a minute and then they come back in. Those fires are, like I said, low intensity. They burn things off very quick and move across the landscape, and they cool very quickly. So a lot of our wildlife goes unharmed. Let's see. So the next question was, thanks for clearing up underbrush and limbing up the trees at Vista Point. You're welcome. I didn't realize that was an issue until I got a phone call. Since many birds rest on the west side of Highway 10, would you consider removing some of the trees along the causeway so we can scope back into the bay? Yes. We actually had an internal discussion about some things that we could do in that area to help increase recreation opportunities and birding opportunities. And I'd love for you, Ed, to give me a phone call sometime next week, and because I'd love to pick your brain on what exactly y'all are looking for, because my staff and I, none of us are birders specifically, but we have already identified some areas that we would like to do some more work on. And we've got a little bit of budget left over for this year that we think we can actually go ahead and speed up some of those things. I would like to also throw out to the group, while we're on the topic, one of my staff suggested we do some more concentrated native local genotype plantings in our park areas. We're going to do some major park upgrades in the next 18 months. Starting to phase it in, because you can imagine it's kind of a harder sell to really do big recreation expenses. As a water utility, it's kind of at the lowest end of our totem pole, but things that we can do low cost or spread out over time. So we're going to be doing a lot of park upgrades, but we're looking for groups who would be interested in like adopting little garden areas, so to speak, around our parks and helping us upkeep and collect and replant some native areas. So if that's something your group would be interested in, we'd love to continue that conversation.
One more question, Raven.
Yeah.
The last one from Keith Hawkins there about concerns about monoculture forestry and herbicide usage on the western ranches in the watershed.
Yeah, so Keith, that's a great question. And that is also something that we are working on somewhat. Part of that green bond that we got, our major goal with that, so if anyone knows anybody, this is your opportunity to shine, but our major goal with that green bond is to leverage those funds against larger grants that we can get to buy big pieces of land. Specifically, we are going after forest legacy money again, because that would provide us a 3-to-1 match. So it would turn our $6.5 million investment over time into, $25,000. And we can buy, or $25 million, sorry, $25 million can buy a lot of property. And so we're targeting those larger timber areas because that monoculture forestry is somewhat a concern to us. We definitely see the benefits of having more native looking stands and all of those things that I talked about in those healthy forests. And those monoculture pine forests that we have out there are non-natives. And so first of all, we want to harvest them, put that money back into our investment. Some of those lands we would probably immediately replant with pine species, though, to be perfectly candid, so that we can slowly turn them back into native pine hardwood stands that would be in the area. But we could plant a pine plantation quicker, cheaper, and get some of our investment back as we slowly transform those forests into a more native looking stand. So some of those, that would be our ultimate goal, is to slowly change that over but we really want to start with getting those short leaves out there. And there are a lot of wildlife benefits to having shortleaf pines out there versus our loblollies that are currently there that are not native. So that is some of the strategy that we're looking at. And we, of course, would manage them differently. We wouldn't plant them as thickly. Our goal is not to make money off of them. It is to return them to a more stable, ecologically sound system. So when I do say that we would plant plantation style in the beginning, it would be done differently from day one than what you see out there in the typical plantation stands.
All right. Well, thank you, Raven, so much for sharing all the things that you and your team are doing to protect our drinking water. We all really appreciate it. And I know we'll be keeping tabs on your work.
Absolutely. Well, I've got you roped in as partners for different things. So
Sure,
I won't let you go far. Awesome. Well, thank you all for hearing our story. I'm going to go ahead and check out. My kid is probably very hungry, so I'm going to go make sure my family's fed, and y'all have a wonderful evening and a wonderful rest of your meeting.
Bye, Raven.
Bye.